Firstly, I'd like to thank Jim from the Public Banking Forum and particularly the Land League for giving me this opportunity. The reason why I'm here is, yes, I'm affiliated to a political party. This is not about politics right now. Basically what I do is I give people information, and anybody that wants to get the information to basically challenge your bank. I've been in the High Court 37 times and the Supreme Court 7 times. I became one of the very few people who have won the Supreme Court twice as a lay litigant. And yes, the banks are coming back after me, but the reality is for them, they had to dismiss a case last week alone. So now they only have one case left against me, and that under the Superior Court Rule 21 will be dismissed on the 9th of May. So those that want to witness the second case of the AIB being dismissed, I did have some class of speech made out, but basically I just want to ask people here one simple question. 4 years ago, when I started representing myself, I raised issues of liquidity, security, securitization, legal and equitable rights, and nobody had a clue what I was talking about. I made contact with people across the world in relation to arguments that were being placed. And there is one simple question that I came up with, and yet no member of the Supreme Court, none of the 37 High Court judges were able to answer the question. And I'll ask every person here today that same question. If you were told the truth back when you entered into the mortgage contract or the indemniture contract, that the bank was insolvent, was operating illegally, was trading without a perfected banking license, had insufficient capital requirements, manipulated its financial status and share value, and they would sell your loan to a third party, would you have signed that contract? No. 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 Well, here's the question. The banks did all that. I produced to the world a document which is registered here. It's a C1 registered mortgage document that has been sitting in the Central Companies Registration Office for now 6 years. And it states, it's dated the 15th of February 2008. This one is the AIB, and every bank in Ireland on this day, they all their solicitors for the banks went in on this same day. And they all stated one thing. Paragraph F, we are insolvent. This is a legal document that no TD, no member of the media would report. This clearly shows that the banking industry of Ireland were operating illegally, trading illegally, funding illegally. And yet nobody questioned it. Why? That's obviously got to do with vested interests. I then initiated a mass criminal investigation against every financial institution in Ireland, dating back to 14th of February 2013, as confirmation from An Garda Síochána. I identified all the criminality that the banking institutions committed. To date, I haven't received one piece of correspondence. I contacted GSOC. GSOC hasn't replied back to me. So we have a banking institution that was operating illegally, selling loans, as you've heard earlier, from thin air, and yet nobody is questioning the legitimacy of the banking institution. You drive your car without a driving license, you'll be convicted. I raised that issue with Judge Ryan. I've been before every judge in Ireland, well, at least in Dublin, and they all know me by first name. Sadly, and this is where I'll go back to my notes, this nation's people did nothing wrong. You and I did nothing wrong. We broke no laws, committed no crimes, but yet every person on this island are paying for the criminal actions of corrupt bankers and culpable politicians. With the greatest respect to Matty. No infections at all. I witnessed at first hand the consequence of these actions. When I stand waiting for the sheriff, mainly with Jerry, to evict an innocent family from the home, or looking into the eyes of a child who stands over her father's grave. I've stood over 37 suicide funerals, and I would have to tell you that it is the most harrowing feeling in the world. We are not aware, none of us here, how easily the mind and mental trauma can change in a second. These are not just crimes against the innocent, but they're crimes against the humanity of Ireland, of the Irish nation. For too long we have tolerated the hypocrisy of our so-called public representatives, who pass laws that desecrate our families, that adds to the heavy burden we already carry, more taxes, more cuts. Over 90 so-called public representatives, TDs in this area and every county in Ireland voted in favour of the eviction bill. That's the Land and Conveyancing Law Reform Bill of 2013, one to which I brought a constitutional challenge against, one you haven't heard about because the media won't report what I do. I challenged the Minister for Justice and the Attorney General in relation to retroactive law, which is unconstitutional. We have 90 so-called public representatives who voted in favour of evicting Irish families. Their oath of office is to uphold the Constitution. The family of Ireland is held above all laws. So how can a civil court issue a civil order that evicts and extradites a family from their home which is constitutionally protected? That has never been identified. Our Constitution was born from the blood of our patriots, which guarantee our families protection above all laws in this state. A Constitution that took brave men and women to sacrifice their lives so that you and I could be free from tyranny and persecution, from unjust taxes and eviction. We have allowed their sacrifice to be in vain. Our government has failed us. Our judiciary has failed us. Our banking institution has failed us. Our police force has failed us. For generations, we have held our hands together on bended knee. Today I ask everyone here to open your hands and to unite with your fellow man next to you. For this is how we can create a better tomorrow for a future. Unite, determined and proud. No more to corruption, no more to deceit. We, this nation's people, have had enough. We elect them. We can eject them. That's called democracy. And that's what our patriots fought to give us. Let's honour their memory and stand together and change our country in the image they envisage for us. In a land where families do not live in fear, where children do not leave the shores of this island. A land where mothers and children are safe from eviction. How can this be achieved, you might ask? And of course, I've listened to every political speech, and I've listened to a lot of political parties advocating solutions. Most of them don't make sense. There's simple things that you might not know, and it's quite simple. You take the average family being evicted. It takes 65,000 euros to evict a family from their home, and a further 15,000 euros to pay sheriff fees and security fees and auctioneers fees. 80,000 euros, and then the bank sells the property on the open market. That mightn't sound much until you see what I've seen. My properties were taken and my family home was given away. Possession was given by a judge that Jerry and myself know quite well, and he didn't consider the consequence. He violated most of the laws known to man in this state, and I fought for 4 years. And I proved that the banks had lied, they manipulated documentation, and I've heard the old chestnut about you're a developer, you caused it. I broke no laws. I committed no crimes. None of you did either. So if this was Pelican House and I was walking in getting more blood than you or you or you, you'd be all quite sympathetic towards me right now because I got more than anybody. And now I've got hepatitis, God bless them. The reality is we need not to argue or point the finger with each other. We need to focus on the criminality that's perpetrated on this country. And it's being done by the banking institutions who are influencing. Now, Jerry touched on this earlier, but just to give you a clear indication of what we're talking about. Let's take an average loan 6 years ago, it's at 300,000 euros. Open market value today of 150,000. The bank spend 80,000 euros of your money evicting that family. The bank is left with 70,000. Now your taxpayers' money has to house that family over the next 20 years, which will cost you on average of 228,000 euros, which will amount to the figure of the people today of over 2,000 families, 200,000 exposed to eviction. It's going to cost you 40 billion. These figures haven't been bandied about. Yet our health service are dealing with people who are committing suicide and the effect on children. This is not being bandied about. All these issues you're hearing about, securitization, people don't know what you're talking about. Most people haven't got a clue. I didn't have a clue up to 4 years ago. Yet, on the Anglo tapes, and everybody was appalled by them, they were laughing and sneering. Yet, not one pundit, not one economist, not one television reporter, and again with respect to Marty, not one politician, asked a question that was in those tapes. Bogue said to Fitzgerald, when we get to 7 billion, we're going to have to securitize it. Why were they securitizing 7 billion euros worth of cash? How much did they get? The central bank had to endorse that. So they were culpable. The minister had to endorse it. He was culpable. Then you go to the fact that they were securitizing all our loans. The first act of KPMG, when Anglo-Irish was liquidated, the first act, and let's remember firstly how that came about. 7 o'clock in the evening, every TD in Ireland was called in. And at 3 o'clock the following morning, they voted on a 58-page document, which is about this thick. I read it and it took me 4.5 hours, and I'm quite slow. The TDs were handed that document 50 minutes before they voted. Thank God they weren't voting for nuclear strikes on Ireland. So, the following morning there was a new bill passed that prevented, because remember, I can't take an interlocutory injunction against anyone if the courts are closed. And that's why Michael Noonan done that. So nobody could go into the courts and take out an injunction to prevent the government introducing a law that protects the banking institution that are based on criminality, who are nothing more than gangsters, who are unlicensed, unsolved. First action of KPMG was to pay a company called Armour Residential Securities. You haven't read about this, but everything I say, I take documentation. I post up, just go Tom Darcy eviction on Facebook. Everything I've said right now is verified with documentation to prove what I'm saying. The first action of KPMG was not to evaluate the cost, the debt, to evaluate the criminality which they're required to by law. The first thing they done was to write a check for 2.61 billion, your taxpayers' money, to Armour Residential, a company that had securitized the Irish Nationwide Building Society's loan books, which didn't appear in the their financial records. By the way, you all know there was 90 billion originally 4 years ago we identified as loans that we owed. Not one of those loans appeared when they were securitized in the financial records of any bank in Ireland. That's fraud. You done that in your company, you'll be charged tomorrow.
Find them in the central bank records.
Find them there if you're looking.
And you can't prosecute them. They're immune from prosecution.
So they create laws to protect the guilty, and us, the taxpayer or the innocent, we're convicted and we're persecuted. I have 1 minute. I'll sum this up quite quickly. 2.61 billion spent for a company owned by one shareholder, one person. Who is that person? And how come the first action of a liquidator spent that type of money to a company that was already liquidated? You don't do that by company law. And nobody asked the question. What I've done for 4 years is I've asked questions that the central bank don't want to answer, An Garda Síochána don't want to answer, our political system don't want to answer, and I will never stop asking questions.